thank you all for coming to the first Town of Falmouth Water Quality Management Committee information meeting for the Oyster Pond watershed. I'm Steve Layton, a member of the committee. Other committee members here tonight are Wynn Monroe, John Waterbury, Virginia Vallejo, and Chairman Eric Kirkington, and our technical liaison, Sia Karplis, and wastewater superintendent Jerry Patamas, and our contract engineer Ed Leonard from Wright Pierce. And we're especially fortunate to have SEA as our very nice neighbor, and their very hospitable president, Peg Brandon, who wants to just say hi.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to say welcome, neighbors. It is Sea Education Association is delighted that we are all sharing the same Oyster Pond watershed and that you can all come up here and meet. It seems like we have enough space for this good crowd. My name is Peg Brandon, and I'm the president here just this past year. So I'm delighted to be back in town after an absence about 7 or 8 years. And it's just as beautiful as it ever was. And the traffic this month is just as thick, too. So I remember all of that. Well, as you may know, for more than 40 years and over 1 million sea miles, Sea Education Association has been offering Sea Semester, which is our ocean-focused study abroad program. We offer that year-round here on our campus, as well as on our 2 ships at sea. And right now we have 1 ship in the South Pacific, just approaching American Samoa, and another one approaching the Straits of Gibraltar. So we are sort of global, even though focused globally on the oceans, but we're based right here in Woods Hole. So we're delighted to be here. Our mission is to create ocean scholars, stewards, and leaders. So we're particularly excited that this discussion, this important discussion on water quality in our neighborhood and our watershed is happening here tonight. So welcome. A few details to make your stay more comfortable is that right down the hallway on this floor is restrooms and water fountain and so on. And there is an elevator in the building as well, right outside this lecture hall, if anybody needs the elevator. So, welcome.
The format tonight is Eric Kirkington, the chairman, is going to give you an overview for about 5 minutes, and then Ed Leonard is going to present the details, and then we're going to open it up to questions.
This microphone we're passing around is because this is being taped by FCTV and will be broadcast to our nationwide television audience sometime in the future. So for them to hear, they're going to need this. We'll do the best we can when we get to questions and answers, but at the beginning part, we're all going to look a little silly older than things, but this is what we're doing. My unenviable task here is to tell you in 5 minutes what Falmouth has been doing about wastewater and estuaries and all of that. Falmouth has been doing more than any other place on Cape Cod, and probably more than any other place in Massachusetts, because we have more estuaries than any other place on Cape Cod and any other place in Massachusetts. We have Oyster Pond, which we know and love. We have 14 other estuaries, ranging from Megansett, all down the coast for West Falmouth, over in the Falmouth side, Falmouth Harbor, Little Pond, Great Pond, Green Pond, Oyster Pond. We have 15 estuaries. Every one of them has problems. Some of them have bigger problems than others. Oyster Pond is not in the top tier of those with problems, you should know. You should be very happy about that. The ones on the south coast, east of Falmouth Harbor, are actually much worse off in terms of fish kills, in terms of eelgrass dying, in terms of any kind of a healthy benthic life. Those estuaries are in big, big trouble. And so those were the ones the town decided to focus on first. And the plan for those, if you've been following it in the papers, is ambitious, it's expensive, and each estuary is going to get its own look. But at the same time that the town decided to attack those estuaries, because they were the worst off, it also said, we're going to do Oyster Pond. And the reason Oyster Pond got to the head of the list was, first of all, you had a very concerned group of citizens who asked for it to be on the top of the list, and you had a great scientific basis because of the scientific studies that have been going on in Oyster Pond for actually moving ahead with a plan that would work and one that you know something about. So Oyster Pond got to sort of be in the top tier as far as this study goes. And tonight you're going to see the results of that initial study. Let me start out by saying there is no plan. All there is right now is a judgment as to what the difficulties in Oyster Pond are, what's causing them, what possible solutions there are to alleviating them. And we're here tonight to have you see the results of that study, to get your input on the results of that study. But let me say at the beginning, I'll say this at the end, to paraphrase Winston Churchill, this is not the beginning of the end. It's not the end of the beginning. It's the beginning of the beginning as far as Oyster Pond is concerned. And we want you to know that. Nobody should leave this room thinking, my God, they're gonna send me a bill for $25,000 to put something in my backyard, or my God, they're gonna sewer my street. These are all ideas that have to be vetted. The town's view on this kind of stuff is we're gonna find the least expensive, most effective, most neighborhood acceptable way of addressing each individual estuary on its own terms, in its own time. None of this is gonna happen today or tomorrow or next week. But over the next 20 to 30 years, this town is committed to cleaning up all these estuaries and making them healthy again. It took us 30 or 40 years to put them in the condition that we put them into. It's gonna take a long time to clean them up. But the cleanup is gonna come, and Oyster Pond is gonna be real high on the list. So with that, let me hand my.
Can we ask one question for
Sure.
some of us that are new in the entities that are involved?
Yep.
And you guys are doing hard work. So what are the entities that are involved? Are they the town or part of the town or a subdivision of the town, or how is that?
Okay, well, the Water Quality Committee was appointed by the selectmen at the authorization of town meeting. We're looking at the whole picture. We were given enough money back in 2011 to actually implement some alternatives to sewer. And everybody understands that sewering is an option. Sewering is a very expensive option, and it has a whole range of side effects that you may not want. There's been a very strong body of opinion in this town that alternatives could and should be looked at if they, and we are doing it, and not just as a matter of scientific study. People think oysters, propagating shellfish, for example, is a way of reducing nitrogen in the waters. We're putting 2 million oysters in the water this year. People think PRBs is an idea that whose time has come. We're getting close to putting a PRB into the ground to see what works. People think fertilizer reduction is right. Fertilizer reduction is a very key way of reducing nitrogen, because putting fertilizer in your lawn is putting fertilizer right into the ground and into the estuaries. So this town has the toughest bylaw in Massachusetts banning fertilizer application within 100 feet of a wetland. And a letter is going out this week to everybody who lives within 100 feet of a saltwater estuary saying, you can't fertilize within 100 feet of that estuary. So we're not just talking the talk here. On each of these alternatives, we've developed a way of making them happen to figure out what works, what's cost effective, what's acceptable to the community at large and to the individuals who might have to be impacted. And at the end of this process, which is going to be 3 to 5 years, we're going to know what works and what doesn't work, what it costs for as many estuaries as we can do it for. So it's, you are part of your role in this project sort of is, we have not yet picked one estuary that hadn't previously been worked over and said, let's look at this one, let's work up a community partnership on how to address it. And so you're a demonstration project too, frankly. How we can work a community around a particular estuary into the plan for that estuary. That's a long answer for a short question. Did that help?
Thank you.
I think you said PRB, what does that stand for?
Permeable reactive barrier. It's a theory, and there's some basis for it, that if you put an intercepting element between the groundwater that's flowing toward the estuary, and the groundwater has nitrogen in it, and it interacts with this barrier you put up, that the nitrogen would stop at the barrier and it wouldn't keep going to the estuary. That's the theory. In practice, it's only been done in circumstances that are not the same as your neighborhood or my neighborhood. It's been done on military reservations and places like that where there aren't any neighbors to complain about a 40-foot deep trench being dug in front of their house. So it's not a proven technology by any means. We are trying to find a way to see if it can be used in a neighborhood in a cost-effective way. But if and when it ever works in that context, it's going to be done because we did it here first, because no one else has done it. That's a PRB. Any other questions before we get into the presentation on Oyster Pond? We'll have an hour afterwards for even more questions, and I'm sure by then you will have many more. So with that, it's all yours.
Try to do this without holding it. Okay, thank you, Art. My name's Ed Leonard. I'm with Ray Pierce. We're a consulting engineering company that specializes in wastewater management. So we presented a similar presentation to this to the Water Quality Management Committee in June, just last month. We got some number of questions from the audience that was present, and we've made some modifications to the presentation to address those comments. So if you heard it before, there's some new twists here, but it's essentially the same. This is the Oyster Pond Comprehensive Wastewater Management Plan. It's targeted, like Eric said, to Oyster Pond. We're not dealing with the rest of the town or groups of watersheds. The purpose of this is to identify the water quality needs, come up with solutions, potential solutions, and then determine how much it's going to cost and how it can happen, over what time frame and how you pay for it. The driver for this project is what's known as the total maximum daily load report, which was generated by the Massachusetts Estuaries project at the behest of Massachusetts DEP. So this is a regulatory driver, ultimately. So the project is set up, it's 3 tasks. The first task was the needs assessment. We completed that last year. We presented that to the Water Quality Management Committee last year. This task is to screen alternatives. So we identified a host of alternatives and then put together some composite plans for comparison. After this process, we would begin going through things like how to pay for it, how to phase it, how long is it going to take, and we would expect there could be more meetings like this along the way. So Oyster Pond, just some background information, 63-acre pond. At its deepest is 6 meters deep. It's managed as a low salinity pond, and it's considered a Class A water body, SA water body by Mass DEP. Historically, it was formed as a kettle pond, and so it was fresh water because at that point sea level was a whole lot lower. As glaciers melted, sea level came up. It actually backflooded the pond and turned it to a saltwater pond. Then longshore drifts eventually sealed it off in the 1700s or isolated it. A railroad went in the 1800s. It became more of started to tip back towards a freshwater pond. Oysters no longer survived there in the 1800s. There was a culvert that was put in the late 1980s that actually flipped it back to a saltwater pond. There was some significant turmoil in the ecosystem of the pond itself. A weir was put in the late 1990s, which then made it what it is today, which is a managed brackish pond. DEP listed it as an impaired water in 2006 and completed its technical study of the pond in 2007 and prepared the TMDL in 2008. So the key issues here are, first and foremost, is development. 160 dwelling units out of the 225 dwelling units there today were built since 1977. The water column nitrogen concentration has come down in the late 1990s, around the time the weir was put in. It was well over 1 milligram per liter. Now it's below 1 milligram per liter, so things are trending in the right direction, but as you can see in this upper graph, it's variable, but reasonably steady since 2005. The other important thing to know about oyster pond is it's a very dynamic system. It operates a lot like a freshwater pond in that it thermally stratifies seasonally, and that the stratification goes up and down in the pond based on the atmospheric temperature and the water temperature. Because it's occasionally backflooded by the ocean, it also stratifies by density. So you have a bottom layer that's got basically ocean water, and then there's a diffuse layer that's brackish, and then something at the top that's less brackish. It's a function, it varies quite a bit from as shallow as 3 meters down to nothing, basically no stratification if it's shown at 6 meters. So it'll go up and down through the years, through the seasons of the year, and it's a function of the environment, the temperatures, and the trunk river itself, which has an impact hydraulically on how water flows in and out of the pond. So it's not a typical estuary. So this is a figure from the needs assessment, and it shows the teardrop shape of the oyster pond watershed. And that was established by the MEP, and it's essentially the groundwater recharge watershed. So what goes into the ground, generally within that area, is considered part of this watershed. 166 developed parcels, 225 dwelling units developed. That produces about 29,000 gallons a day of wastewater, which all makes its way eventually into the pond. We worked with the planning department and the oyster pond working group to look at future flows based on development within undeveloped parcels in the watershed, and projected 19% growth over the planning horizon, which is through 2040, the year 2040. And so that increases the wastewater flow to almost 35,000 gallons a day in a do-nothing approach. So that'll make the problem worse. We then reviewed the various needs in 5 categories. We look at sanitary needs, which is effluent bubbling out of the ground from leach fields that have failed. Water supply protection, are there any public or private water supplies in the area? Surface water protection from nutrient enrichment. Convenience and aesthetics, which are things like mounted systems or tight tanks. And then growth, as I mentioned previously. The conclusion from that analysis was that the only real driver in this watershed is protection of surface water from nutrient enrichment. So that's what we focused on for alternatives. So the present load, as determined by the MEP, is 5.2 kilograms per day of nitrogen to the water body. That's based on data from 2001 to 2004. That's when the MEP collected all their data. And it's broken down, and about 72% of that comes from septic systems, 28% comes from everything else: stormwater, fertilizers, land use, forested areas. The TMDL is substantially lower than that, 1.44 kilograms per day. So there's an awful lot of nitrogen that's coming into the water body today that needs to be removed, and any growth that happens also needs to be removed because it's by definition greater than TMDL. So one of the keys to our approach was to make sure that we addressed this problem holistically, not just focusing on the wastewater, but recognizing that we can still do something about the 28% that's coming from non-wastewater. So to illustrate that, if you ignored the non-wastewater components, you'd have to remove 77% of the nitrogen in order to hit the TMDL. But we looked at different amounts of removal, reasonable removal amounts of the non-wastewater components. We concluded that 33% is reasonable, and that therefore reduces the wastewater removal to 64%. So we're trying to look at the pond holistically, the watershed holistically, to minimize the amount of wastewater management that's necessary. So in terms of alternatives, we identified 32 different technologies and approaches, or tools in the tool bag. And we categorized them by non-structural or structural, something you would maybe legislate or recommend versus build. Source control versus remediation, which would be sewering a house because you're dealing with the source, versus a PRB, which is remediation. It's already in the groundwater and you're cleaning it on its way through the system. We looked at on-site versus off-site treatment, your backyard system versus an off-site treatment plant, whether or not we address nitrogen or phosphorus or both. Phosphorus is also a driver because the pond acts a bit like a freshwater pond, so we have to be concerned about both nutrients in this case. And lastly, and most importantly, is whether or not the technology is currently DEP approved. There's a lot of approaches that are being considered right now on the Cape, because seriously considered because of the significant costs associated with cleaning up the estuaries. But there are some things that are being considered more seriously than others, and there are some that are having demonstration projects implemented, and others that are just being talked about. So we try to have a sense for that as well. So I'm going to go through each of the alternatives so people know what we looked at and why. Zoning modifications and growth management would be one way to deal with that growth, that 19% growth, and the cost that comes with it. The conclusion from the working group was recently passed flow neutral regulation, which was required to get DEP 0% financing, is sufficient for this watershed. So there may be opportunities for conservation easements in the watershed, but it's not something that's going to be required or incorporated directly into the plan. Fertilizer controls, as Eric said, Falmouth has already done a great job at that, and that's going to, there'll be education pieces that go out as soon as next week, but that's going to be part of the plan. Water conservation, in and of itself, doesn't remove nitrogen, but it preserves the life of a septic system. So in the sense that we want to leave as many septic systems as possible and still meet the nitrogen requirements, that's a good thing. So we're going to work towards water conservation. Garbage grinders produce or send excess nitrogen out to the septic system that doesn't really need to go there. Falmouth has a garbage grinder ban that's applicable to some elements of development, and the Board of Health is going to consider whether to expand that, to make that more prevalent for new construction and rehabilitation of systems. Septic system maintenance is, again, it's another good thing to do to preserve the life of your system. It does not remove nitrogen. Pumping your septic tank doesn't remove nitrogen, but it does preserve the life of the system, and is, again, a good thing to do. And then also there's a body of evidence that suggesting that atmospheric sources of nitrogen have reduced fairly dramatically since the Clean Air Act was implemented in 1991. At that point, there was fairly uncontrolled discharges of all sorts of air emissions to the atmosphere. One of the unanticipated benefits that came out of that is nitrogen sources have been sort of polished out of the atmosphere as well. And that could be one, it's definitely one thing to keep track of. The town has asked the county, the commission, the county to establish an atmospheric monitoring station on the Cape in order to really quantify this. The projections are, it's been reduced 20 to 30% since the 90s, and there's another 20 or 30% expected based on additional refinements from air pollution control as well as mobile sources like cars. So this is an important thing that, again, doesn't involve infrastructure that we need to put in place here, but helps the long term. From a structural perspective, source control, obviously we want to deal with stormwater and put in BMPs, best management practices, in place. That's street cleaning, it's better catch basin systems, putting in rain gardens, things like that. and then looking at wastewater sources, wastewater-related source control. We have, as a part of this analysis, we looked at how would we collect wastewater, and concluded that a small, quote-unquote, small pipe system is the way to go, not conventional gravity sewers in places wherever it's needed. We looked at various on-site methods, off-site, which I'll talk about in a bit, as well as effluent disposal. So an on-site system, typical backyard system, what leaves the house is about 60 milligrams per liter of nitrogen. And a typical septic system will remove some amount of that nitrogen, 42%, typical, roughly. But in terms of what MEP cares about, the TMDL is based on the rest of the removal. That's already, that septic system is the baseline. So if you call a contractor and say, I want to put in an IA system, and they tell you it's they can remove 70% of the wastewater, you need to add 70% of the nitrogen, you need to ask from where am I dividing by? Because what we need to care about is how much better does it perform than a standard system. So a traditional IA system, a denitrifying system on somebody's property, might remove 70% of the nitrogen from the house, but it's really only contributing 50% removal to what our goal is, to remove excess nitrogen. And obviously, if you can get a system that produces even better nitrogen removal, better effluent quality, then you're removing even more.
IA stands for?
Sorry, it's Innovative Alternative System. That's what IA stands for. It's essentially, for Cape Cod, that basically means denitrifying septic system.
Is it biologic or physical?
Biological. So we have off-site approaches that we've considered. One is to collect wastewater that is collected, that is needed to be collected, would be sent to one of three places. One could be to the Blacksmith Shop Road treatment plant that is built and operational in Falmouth, publicly owned. A second option would be the Woods Hole Oceanographic right down the street. The Quissa campus has its own private treatment plant for their own needs, but it's significantly closer and maybe an opportunity for public-private partnership. Both of those are outside the watershed, so those amount to 100% removal of nitrogen from anybody that's connected. And then the third alternative would be to build something small, a decentralized cluster satellite system in the watershed, and then dispose of the treated effluent in the watershed. That removes, it has a lower net removal of nitrogen because you're taking it out, cleaning it up, but you're still putting it back in the watershed. So you have to account for the residual in the math. So these are some just pictures of various treatment plants. The one on the upper left is the Hui plant. It's a little building, a bunch of below-grade structures, and a just leach field, basically under a ball field. Pretty low profile, fits into their complex quite well. This is a condo development on the North Shore in Hudson, Mass, 10,000 gallons a day. Everything's below grade in a little building. This is the Community of Jesus in Orleans. It's built inside something that looks a lot like the neighbor's house, probably. And then we're not considering, something that looks like that. That's just to be clear. By definition, if you're dealing with wastewater off-site, you have to find sites to put treatment or disposal or both. So we kind of looked at aerial mapping and everything that was within 4,000 feet of the pond itself and said, what's not developed, what's publicly owned, privately owned. We came up with 10 locations that were suitable given the size needs. Of those, a couple we had to throw out because of environmental receptors. But there are some candidates, but obviously there are issues. They're not publicly owned in most cases, so there's some easement and negotiation issues that would have to happen. we would need site-specific information, we'd need to talk to those property owners and review deed restrictions in some cases to see if it's even feasible. So those are some potential issues related to sites. And so another thing, work was very clear about what was on the table and what wasn't on the table in terms of effluent disposal. So we're talking subsurface again, either something that's called drip dispersal, which is tubing, or subsurface leaching, which is looked like the ball field at the Woods Hole facility, or something that's called a wick, which is about as big as this table, and it looks a lot like a manhole cover, not extensive, and it's definitely not open sand beds like you see in Hyannis. That is again not on the table at all for this watershed. We actually hit on most of these in your discussion in Q&A, but in terms of alternatives on the remediation side, so now we're not talking source control, we're talking cleaning it up once it's already in the environment. PRVs, we already talked about. Aquaculture is sort of the bigger name for either growing shellfish or growing algae, to use the nutrients as a food source and then take out the biomass, essentially. Shellfish isn't going to work in oyster pond because it's brackish, and algae growth.
I can ask it later.
Okay.
My question was basically, back in the 1700s, that water was able to sustain oysters. What would be wrong with bringing it back so that it could?
I'll come back to that. Because that's like one of the next one, and it actually is the next one here. So algae is one of the, I mentioned that there are some things that DEP is seriously considering as alternatives demonstration projects, and some that they're probably not really considering seriously. And I would put algae aquaculture in that category. So the commission and DEP are developing what's called the 208 plan update right now, which is, you may have heard about it. It's due to be published at some point in the fall, and we'll speak probably specifically as to whether that's a viable alternative here or anywhere.
Which commission, and then, so like the DEP, is that the state or federal?
DEP is state, Massachusetts DEP.
So then you said,
There's EPA, which is the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, that's federal. Massachusetts DEP is the state department that's in charge of environmental quality. And then there's Cape Cod Commission, who does a lot of things, but one of their charges is to deal with the 208 plan, regional wastewater management, discussions, and nitrogen management. Those are, and the fourth entity would be MEPA, which is the Massachusetts Environmental Protection Act, or agency that is sort of the environmental clearinghouse for any proposed project, whether it's a shopping mall or wastewater infrastructure. So inlet so shellfishing wouldn't work here because it's brackish. Inlet modifications is something that's being done in town, on the south coast, Bourne's Pond, right? So it's opening up a water body to better tidal communication, so it flushes much more frequently. It's not something that we considered here because this pond has been managed as a brackish pond for, well, I guess for whatever it is, 12, 15 years. That's certainly something that could be put on the table. It's a question of, I guess I couldn't speculate on whether it would be cost effective or not, because to do it, to consider it, to evaluate it, you'd have to have the MEP use their hydrodynamic model to see how much tidal flushing would be necessary and whether or not, what cost you'd have to apply to do it. So at this point, it's not one of the alternatives we've considered.
What could you, like, what would seem that would be a much smaller, lower cost than?
Yeah, it's probably worth letting him go through his whole act and then come back with the
Okay,
questions.
I'm sorry.
Thanks.
So, next one, phytobuffers. That's basically putting in a vegetated buffer between any stormwater runoff and the water body. So, plantings to control sheet flow, surface water runoff, as well as things that have root systems that might extend into the water to grab nitrogen and treat it as it goes by. Those are, again, good ideas. It's probably a good idea. It falls into the best management practice category, but it's not something that will be expected of everybody or required. Fertigation is essentially pumping water that's nitrogen enriched from septic systems, from effluent, and then using that to irrigate lawns. It's got nitrogen, it's got phosphorus in it. If you're far enough away from the septic system, you've addressed any sanitary issues associated with bacteria. So it's something DEP is seriously considering as a potential. And it could be used here, and it's not something that's part of the core plan, but an alternative. And lastly, pond mixing is one there's been a lot of discussion about, so I'm going to just do a couple quick slides on that now. So pond mixing is essentially a mixer, in this case a floating mixer, solar powered. This is a picture of Santuit Pond in Mashpee. They have a couple of these things, but that's the picture from shore. So obviously it's got some aesthetic issue, it's got some potential boating, human contact issues. It would not be done as the sole means of addressing water quality in the pond. It has to be coupled with source reduction to make it viable. It would need to be a demonstration project, so it's something the town would have to decide whether they wanted to approach as a demonstration. It would need MEP modeling, and it would need some data collection. The thing I haven't been able to articulate well in the past is what it roughly would cost and what it might save. So it's spending something on the order of $100,000 to buy the equipment, to get a data sonde, which would collect a lot of continuous data, to analyze that data, and to, with probably a 50% probability of saving at least that much every year. So it's got a pretty short, moderate probability, but pretty quick payback, 2 years or less.
I'm sorry, but can you just explain what pond mixing is?
I'm going to do that next,
Okay.
right now.
Great.
So it's not something to ignore. And this is really hard to see, but so in orange this is a cross section of the pond the long way. So from treetops here to the shore over there. And you have Shore Road and say treetops or Ransom Road up here. The bottom, for most of it, is at or above 4 meters, and then there's a deep hole down towards the ocean. And this here is a hole, and down here there's a much deeper hole that is where that stratification occurs most of the time. So this mixer is solar powered. It's basically a propeller. It's like a old-fashioned wall fan, except horizontal, like a ceiling fan, that pulls water up from the bottom from a pretty discrete interval of the pond, and it's above that stratified layer, and it pulls from only about an 18 to 24 inch zone. It brings it up the column, spreads it across the top, and it just circulates this way. We know the pond is well mixed horizontally, but we also know that it's not well mixed vertically. So we're not talking about a lot of mixers, we're talking about one, pulling from a fairly discrete area at the bottom, and the goal of it is to keep the stratification below the compliance elevation, which is what's defined in the TMDL. Okay. So we have some baseline alternatives and some baseline measures and alternative measures. The baseline are the ones that are going to be part of every plan, and it's all the non-structural source controls, periodic maintenance, dredging of the trunk river itself, and then stormwater best management practices. Alternatives are things that we may consider based on further discussion and analysis. Those are changing water quality criteria, implementing pond mixing, modifying what we call dynamic compliance elevation, that's dealing with the dynamic fluctuation of the stratification layer, whether or not it makes sense to implement fertigation or phytobuffers, and whether or not it makes sense to establish a watershed district to help manage the costs and manage water quality. So the may consider items are for future discussion. So we came up, so we're taking the baseline measures, the alternative measures, we came up with 6 what we call composite plans, which looks at how to address compliance at the planning horizon with the TMDL. So these include growth. And they range from sewering to the Blacksmith Shop Road treatment plant to no action. So, Plan 1 is to sewer 70% of the dwelling units, send that out of the watershed to Blacksmith Shop Road. That so the 70% is of the future developed dwelling units, okay? So that would meet the TMDL, which is nitrogen. It would produce significant phosphorus removal, which is an important characteristic here. It reduces freshwater recharge to the pond a little bit, not a lot, 4%. It would send about 26,000 gallons per day to the Blacksmith Shop Road treatment plant. One of the big issues here is whether or not that plant actually has capacity. And that's something that I don't believe will be known until some point next year. And it's related to the permit and EPA and
It's discharge
West Falmouth
capacity.
Harbor discharge capacity. Yep. Okay. Plan 2 is pretty similar, except that instead of going to North Falmouth, we're going to go down the street to the Woods Hole treatment facility. Because we're taking wastewater out of the watershed, it's got all this, it meets the TMDL, same amount of phosphorus, same amount of freshwater recharge reduction. But we know who's not super interested in this idea because they have their own growth plans long-term. So public-private partnerships are a lot like pushing rope, so maybe that could happen. Plan 3 would be to build the low-profile, fitting in the neighborhood type small treatment plant in the watershed, and then disposing of that in the watershed. It would be 87% of the dwelling units in the watershed. It would meet the TMDL. It would remove significant phosphorus. No change in freshwater recharge because you're putting it all back in the same place. And then the question would be, where of the 8 remaining places do you put it? What fits in best? Whose neighbor's louder than the other people's neighbors? So there'd be lots of fun associated with that. Plan 4 is a hybrid plan, and this came about from comments and discussions at the June Water Quality Management Committee meeting. So this is different if you were there last time. So this is sewering properties at the north end of the pond and sending that to Blacksmith Shop Road. And then letting, over time, the rest of these homes in the watershed convert to IA systems based on building permits or system failure, Board of Health Department, Board of Health type permitting. So it would impact 94% of the homes in the watershed. 112 would be sewered, 117 would be IA systems over time. It meets the TMDL, removes a little less phosphorus, a little less freshwater recharge change, takes less capacity wherever you send it, and it's got the same issue with Blacksmith Shop Road.
Let people know what the AAX stands for.
Sorry, no, that's annual average. Yeah. What do you call that? Techno administrative. So Plan 5 is not a hybrid plan, it's all on site. So everybody addresses nitrogen in their own way on their own property. This would impact 94% of the homes in the watershed. And the reason is that Oyster Pond South doesn't contribute to water quality in the pond, based on MEP's modeling. So it's an in-watershed, meets the TMDL, no change in freshwater recharge. The bigger issue is the math doesn't work if you get past the planning horizon. You have to then change course and take water out of the watershed, 2040 and out. So it might make more important conservation restrictions or conservation easements at some point in the future. And then systems that DEP would approve that meet 10 or less, there's a fairly limited set of options. So you're not talking 10 different manufacturers you could buy something from, you might be down to 2. So there are issues there. I expect over time that will change as this topic matures on Cape Cod. Plan 6 is no action, and it doesn't do a lot. But one thing is, one thing that's interesting though, if people don't think about this all the time, is that there's still a cost associated with that, because people are pumping their septic systems, and whether or not you budget $900 a year to replace your system in 20 years or not, that's an actual cost. Most people just write the check or get a loan or something when it happens, but there's a cost associated with that. So principal commonalities, all the plans include the baseline measures. They all can include the alternative measures. And they all can include eco-toilets where it's desired by the homeowner and approved by the town. So somebody could elect to do that if they wanted to, and it was approved by the town. Principal differences, all the plans except the no action plan meet the TMDL. Some of the plans involve sewers, some don't. Some remove wastewater from the watershed, others don't. And some of them remove significant phosphorus, whereas others remove only a little or none. So those are all kind of things that might tip the balance. We developed costs for each of these 6 options, and we did that by coming up with conceptual layouts, where would sewers go, how many, and doing the sort of the nitrogen budget. How much do we have to go get from a property, from a dwelling unit parcel perspective, for current and future conditions. We use capital and O&M costs from the Barnstable County Cost Report, which the Cape Cod Commission published in 2010, for treatment plant costs and IA system costs. We developed some other costs for things that aren't in that report, like sewer systems, pipes, the cost for effluent disposal. We developed those ourselves based on experience. And then we included allowances for the things that are part of every project, legal, technical, administrative, site investigations to find appropriate sites. So from a cost perspective, these are numbers for the planning horizon. And this is intended to be the all-in number. So if everybody in the watershed had to put their checkbook on the table and pay for their septic system replacement, or their septic pumping, or their new IA system, or their new sewer connection, based on the rules that we establish in each plan, these are the costs. You know, it's 0 for no action, but 6 million to 14 million over some number of years. That could be 5 years if everything happened at once, or it could be 30 years if things go through building permit cycles and health department inspections. That's all phase 3, task 3 stuff. We'll big things to be discussed and figured out later. As a way to assess how much O&M impacts the capital cost, we included an equivalent annual cost. So the equivalent annual cost includes the O&M, what you have to pay for to pump the system, electricity, what your sewer bill might be, and it includes debt service on any loan, whether the loan is
What's O&M?
operation and maintenance. Sorry. So if the town were to secure a loan for a public project, it has already been approved for 0% financing for 30 years. So that's obviously going to produce a much lower payment than a loan you might get from a bank down the street, which might be at 4 or 5% over as long, probably the longest would be 20 years. So there's some elements there that go into the equivalent annual cost. And these are watershed-based costs. So to illustrate the difference between planning horizon and growth and current, I did the same thing, but took out the future growth. So you could see what it might be if you did everything today for just today. And that drops the numbers a fair amount, from 4.7 to just over 11 million. So there's a substantial cost associated with growth, and that cost varies by plan. So the next steps, obviously we're having this meeting, we want to hear as much as you have to say about this, and then the working group will reconvene and decide sort of what we do with the comments, how we incorporate it, who we reach out to, whether we have additional model runs done by MEP. And then at some point, we would get into developing the recommended plan, which is a lot of work in and of itself. That's the short listing, maybe dropping off 3 or 4 of these plans because we know they're not desirable, and focusing on 2 of them. One important thing is to account for the changes in the watershed that we know have happened since 2001, 2004, when MEP collected their data and what they calibrated their model on. We know there's been changes in fertilizer use, water use, number of homes. There's more homes than there were then, and the atmospheric deposition has changed. So there's a lot that's changed that we need to account for. And those can help to reduce these costs. Discuss and develop a phasing plan, which could vary by plan. Monitoring, funding, discussion of betterments, how betterments would be applied on public portions of the project. We need to determine consistency with the Commission's 208 plan, which is expected to be out soon, I think I said earlier. That's a regional plan, but they want to make sure that all the towns are acting within some amount of uniformity, I guess. And then to coordinate that with the regulators that are important for this kind of work. So it's, as we've talked about before, DEP, MEP, MEPA, and the Commission. So there's still a lot of work to be done, but we've tried to come up with a broad range of things that we could then pick from Plan 4 and mix it with Plan 2 and kind of go a la carte. So that's all I have for formal stuff. So I have at your disposal.
Okay. Let me just clarify one thing. We understand this committee has been immersed in this topic for the last 4 years, and even we have trouble with the acronyms. So do not be embarrassed if you don't know what O&M is or DEP is or anything else. Feel free to ask, but it's understood. You're walking into this for the first time, and you're entitled to not know everything. The other thing to understand is nothing is going to happen soon. The town of Falmouth just voted $50 million to do a sewer system and a pond opening project and a plant upgrade. Their appetite for spending more money on anything right away is 0. So we had plenty of time to work something out for Oyster Pond that Oyster Pond likes and that the town can participate in at a time that the town feels like it wants to spend money on this stuff again. But it's not going to be this year or next year. So we have plenty of time to do this right. So, questions?
Eric, I suggest that people walk up to the mic.
If that's possible.
And you know, maybe they just line up there.
Is that a microphone that'll work?
That is the microphone.
Perfect.
Yes.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, if you could tell us your name, you too will be on there.
I'm Andrea Walters. I live on Oyster Pond Road, and I'm kind of wondering what the pond wants, if they're all equal from the pond's point of view. If it wouldn't be too much of a digression, if you could review what a weir is, why we have a weir, what a weir does for us to make it the kind of pond it is, and if the pond itself would vote for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
have a good slide that shows the weir. But I can go back to the, so the weir is at the south end of the pond. And it controls, it sets to hold a certain water surface elevation in the pond and to keep the ocean water out, except on really high tides and storms. So, but it's over here, and it's designed to keep the amount of ocean water that comes into the pond to a minimum. In terms of what the pond is like, I don't know, it seems to me that's been happening for an awfully long time, probably thousands of years. So finding a way to manage water quality without going too far, too extreme, I guess, is there's obviously excess nitrogen input into the water. My gut feeling is that the TMDL is pretty conservative. I think that managing it the way it is, a brackish system is fine, if that's what the watershed wants. It seems to be something DEP's accepted by default, if nothing else. I don't think they would be opposed to changing it, but that might be a big fight too. I don't know.
Sure.
My name is Rob King. I live in treetops on the edge of the pond. Before I get to my question, the alewives might have a problem if you change the pond into a saltwater pond. My question is different. I'd like to know, in the modeling and the estimation of the solutions, if anything is done to refine the term household, because we have obviously a lot of households around this pond that are occupied at most 2 months out of a year, which is 1/6 of a year. And they are a lot different, obviously, than a household that is occupied 12 months of the year. And is that taken into account anywhere, or is it best on a planning basis to simply say a household is a household is a household?
We looked at what measured water use for all parcels that had a water meter. So that's basically, so it's the total volume in the year. So it didn't matter whether a homeowner was there for a week or 52 weeks. They produced used a certain amount of water, and that's what we used for determining that. That's what MEP used as well, determining total load to the pond, the nitrogen load to the pond. In terms of how we developed the plans, at this point we went with not parcels, but dwelling units. So there's more dwelling units than there are parcels, because there's a handful in the watershed that have either a little bit more or a lot more dwelling units. So we did account for that, and I think as we will proceed through the recommended plan phase, we'd have to refine that even further.
The same question came up in Mara Vista, where quite a lot of the houses are seasonal. And what we found was that the water use of the seasonal houses was pretty much the same as the water use of the year-round houses. People use those seasonal houses quite a lot in the summer, and the water use ends up the same.
That makes you question your measurements.
Well, it's the water meter that the town installed. It's as good as you're going to get.
My name is Lou Turner. I'm a member of the OPIT board, and I monitor the alewife migrations basically all year. I want to make sure you understand that the weir is no longer functioning the way that it was designed to function. In fact, the lagoon is actually essentially at the same level of oyster pond basically the entire year. There used to be a distinct separation between the two, but the flow out of the pond, there is a a steady, slow migration out of the pond, but that migration is determined by something in the trunk river. There used to be an obvious separation between Oyster Pond and the lagoon. That separation is no longer really exists. And the flow in the trunk river is very low. I and others try to keep it enough so that there's an obvious flow out of Oyster Pond that the fry will notice. But I'm glad to hear that you mentioned the fact that there ought to be a periodic dredging of the trunk river. And that would be a big help in my mind to maintaining a better flow out of Oyster Pond and the lagoon.
Thank you, Lou. Young lady there, and we'll get over to you in a second, sir.
Hi, Liz Saito, Ransom Road. I had two questions. One, the eco toilet, you said that's an option for all homeowners. Is that like with the little pond, like if you put in an eco toilet, you don't have to pay for whatever option happens down the line, or is that? No. Okay, so what's the eco toilet option that you're?
I think that we're obviously still exploring the value and acceptability of eco toilets, but there was a special law passed for the little pond area, which allowed the town to say, if you put an eco toilet in and join the program and do a few other things, you would not have to pay the benefit. We're going to find out in the next couple of months whether that actually induces anybody to put in an eco toilet or not. But it is not available for anyplace else. And we are so far from having a sewer plan for this area that it isn't. The question is almost way too early.
Okay.
But what we're concluding on these eco toilets is that at best they're probably likely to be the equivalent of an IA system. That they will be able to take out, maybe bring you down to 10 parts or 15 parts per million. They aren't a cure-all. They don't take out all the nitrogen by any means, and they have a lot of consumer issues, shall we say. But to answer your question, they're not part of this plan as far as giving people the option of not paying the benefit, to say the least.
Thank you. And my second question quickly, you talked about the vegetative buffers and trees especially being important at the edge of the pond. But a lot of the trees at the edge of the pond are being smothered by grapevines and other things, but I have this idea that I'm not allowed to touch the grapevines because of conservation. Is there any clarification on, like, can you save the trees that are being smothered by the grapevines? Is that allowed? That's my second question. Thank you.
Anything within 100 feet of a wetland does have to get their permission, so you might be right. Let's deal with it.
Thank you. Pardon my situation. I'm legally blind here. I'm David Sykes. I reside in Treetops, and I don't have any new element to offer, but I would like to reinforce what Lou Turner said. We have in this pond, one of its key features, often mentioned, is the weir. But as we who have boated and lived with that weir for years know that the weir does not function in the way it was designed to function, if it ever did, and I don't really know that. But somehow I think it is important that we get an understanding of the weir and how it operates and how it doesn't operate, because I think it is an important part of the system. If you go to the weir at almost any time, you will find that the weir is flooded, that the water level over the top gate boards in the weir is totally flooded. I mean, it may be a foot higher, and visually, there is very little flow in and out. Now, the weir is doing something, but I somehow feel that it's an important part of this system, and we simply do not understand it well enough. So I urge people to take what Lou says about this weir and see if we can really, you know, what is this weir? What is it doing? Do we need it? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Matt O'Connor. I live on Fells Road, and my question pertains to the advanced septic systems. Did any of your cost estimates take into consideration any sort of financial incentives for people to upgrade their septic systems beyond the bare minimum, the Title V? So when you were giving us those numbers, it didn't include a cost to the town or anybody else that, you know, to provide homeowners with some sort of incentive to upgrade their septic system beyond the bare minimum. That additional cost would be borne by the homeowner in your minds. Is that correct?
Well, the current laws, regulations, that would be the effect, yeah. What this committee and this town did over the last 4 years for the Heights Mara Vista area is we looked at what things were going to cost the individual homeowners there, and we worked out a number of ways to make it less costly for them.
Mm-hmm.
Like several pieces of special legislation through that reduce the cost to the homeowner. It's entirely possible that if we got to the point of saying on-site integrated systems are a must here, that should be come up with some way of helping the homeowner be able to pay for that.
Okay.
But second, we haven't got to that point yet.
Okay, I just didn't know whether any of your numbers incorporated any of that sort of thing.
The premise is you think for it yourself.
Okay, my second question is about phosphorus. You mentioned phosphorus in some of your analysis, and yet when you mentioned the price per pound of nitrogen removed, all of a sudden phosphorus isn't mentioned anymore. How important is phosphorus in this whole process?
It's important in reality. It's not something the DEP has developed, or MEP or DEP has developed a specific number to target to hit. And this phenomenon has been observed in the Gulf of Mexico as well, where you have saltwater, brackish water, and fresh water, and at that brackish interface, the amount of phosphorus has an impact on whether algae blooms or not. So we had Woods Hole Group as part of our team. They did an analysis that showed the nitrogen to phosphorus ratios in the pond at various times, and it showed they have a graph that shows that at certain times it is phosphorus limited. So it's important to keep phosphorus, keep it in mind, and make sure that we reduce it. We haven't calculated a specific number or target ourselves yet, though.
Okay. So it's a secondary consideration?
It's secondary only in that there's not a regulatory driver for it.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Linda Calmace-Jones. I live at Treetops, and I'm the chairman of the board there. And I'm with both hats on, both as a resident and also from the board perspective. I guess a couple questions. One is that it appears that option 4 changed from the time, and it also appears that it is a solution that kind of targets particular areas as opposed to the entire region in terms of a solution or combination of solutions. And so my question is there a way that you're looking at in terms of how to be able to equitably spread the costs throughout the entire region, since everybody will benefit, but some people may have larger burdens than others, either on a one-time expense or ongoing expenses. And the second question that I have really goes along with that same thing, which is that we're looking at a watershed-wide problem and a watershed-wide solution. And the models that you're showing are various ways that everybody can benefit from that. As you're going through and you're looking at the financial analyses, are you looking at, once again, the equitableness in terms of how to share the costs, both the one-time and the ongoing, with all of the people that are receiving the benefits of this work?
Yes.
Yes, you are. And,
Yeah.
I mean, because as I'm looking at this and you're coming to some next steps or moving towards recommendations, I'm hoping that those are important factors in the recommendation.
So I can give you the example of what the town very recently did with the sewer in the Heights of Meredith. It worked out that the per household cost was going to be about $25,000 for each individual homeowner. Well, that's a lot of money. So the town did several things. One was to say, we passed a special act with the legislature that allowed those costs to be spread out over 30 years. We qualified for a zero interest loan, which means the selectmen can charge the homeowner zero interest on the betterment over those 30 years. So when you take those kind of factors, you bring the cost down to $600 a year for a betterment. For a homeowner.
50% split.
Right, well, that's the other piece, the town voted that the town would pay 30% and the homeowner would only pay 70%. So at the end of the day, those homeowners are quite likely to be paying $600 a year for a betterment, which would not have been possible if we hadn't gotten all these special acts in place.
At the same point, if you have one area, let's just say treetops is one of the areas that's being sewered, and everybody else is as they are needed, either because their septic systems fail or because there's a sale of the unit, then the timing of those expenses are certainly different. And that's part of, so it's not just that everybody's going to have a cost eventually. Some people are going to have a cost up front in a very significant way.
We understand that loud and clear. We understand that's the political dimension of all this, which is everybody wants to be fair and everybody wants the other guy to pay as much as possible.
No, I just want everybody to pay what they need to pay.
We're going to try to be fair with the community involvement and come up with something that we know will be acceptable to the community. We are not going to waste our time going to town meeting with something that they won't approve, and we're not going to waste our time going to Oyster Pond with something that the Oyster Pond people are going to be up in arms about.
Is the scale of what we're talking about here something similar to Mar Vista? Because that's what's very different.
No, the scale here is tiny. There was 1,600 parcels over there. We're talking about 250.
No, but I mean, for a cost per household, because that's just very difficult to discern. And along these lines, I mean, it's trying to read the report. It's wonderful. It also is from trying to understand what the potential costs are. It's very, very difficult. I mean,
The answer is yes. No, I mean, he didn't mean scale. He meant cost per household. It's in the same ballpark. It's the same order of magnitude.
because there's numbers in there, the cost per household of $200,000 or $300,000, $400,000 on one of those charts.
No.
Maybe I got mixed up, but
I mean, nothing is, order of magnitude, it's not all 5 factor 10.
But the answer is yes, it's in that order.
It's in the
kind of
same
scale
ballpark.
that-
And it's nothing to assume that treetops is gonna have to do something, and someone else won't have to do anything for 20 years. The system doesn't work that way. To get the TMDL approved, maybe there's a group of people that do something immediately, but the other people that need to bring the watershed into compliance are gonna have to move probably faster than they may want to. So I think that was a nice thought, but I don't think it has a basis that will be supported at DEP to say we can wait for 20 to 30 years as the properties turn over. It's a nice fair thing, but so.
And there's other models in other states where the sharing of costs are done in different ways, and so hopefully those will be considered as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
We think from Oyster Pond Environmental Trust, we are trying to very hard to study the 6 alternatives and to review them for adding comments at each meeting that you have. And we very much appreciate the modification of Alternative 4 that Ed went over in this particular case. And we are also evaluating equity situations. I can just point out that the cost per resident on treetops, if they had to build their own system and have it there, we asked Holmes and McGrath to give us that cost associated with it, would range from 28 to 38,000 per resident. However, the way in which they are moving under Alternative 4 by tying it into an existing facility or one that's built as part of another system greatly reduces the cost. It, in fact, in some cases can almost halve that cost that I'm talking about. So it can be an equity means by which the treetops or condominiums certainly can benefit. We have additional requests for you, and it was in the form of Plan 7, which has not been voted by the board or reviewed yet, but it is being discussed. You have already incorporated many of these within your Alternative 4. So I'm still going to submit it to you for consideration. The only major aspects are that we are asking for a nitrogen credit because we are purchasing land at the present time to remove it out of future development, and we would like to have that amount of nitrogen being deducted and also from the area of future projection. And now, presumably, you're going to do that under the changes to the watershed, under what's upcoming to you. The second aspect is there is good range, I believe, in considerations of lowering the cost per homeowner on individual systems. You've heard that already on a request by some of the homeowners of systems. We'd like to, one discussion item has been that the cost involved in the alternatives should take into effect that if you have a Title V system already, it costs much less to modify that to a D-night system than one that is an old septic tank type of system. Tim would fall in that category of the man who is already talking. What?
Could you send us the information that validates what you just said?
Yes. Yes, I can. We would ask other vendors, Lombard Associates, and
Let's leave vendors out of it. Vendors are vendors. Lombardo is a professional engineer.
Yes.
These are our consultants. He's been asked to work with our consultant so that we can get a holistic plan.
Sure.
Not go around our procurement process.
I understand, but the point is very simple in this particular case. Title V meeting already has aeration associated with it that's need for denitrification. Then you only have to add the denite portion so that the cost is less, taking a Title V system to a final than such. But we would like to have you evaluate that consideration. We're just asking that now. All right, and thank you very much.
One other thing, you mentioned nitrogen credit. It doesn't grow, so the amount of nitrogen coming off that parcel is the same as it is now. Credit is usually, something you put in something. You're absolutely right. The cost was put into conservation restriction, and we didn't project housing going on there.
Yes.
Bill has a good point. If you were planning, if your growth projections talked about 21 house lots, you take 21 acres away, and less house lots.
We would suggest maybe the removal of 20 of those right now as a reasonable credit.
And that was discussed after the last meeting, and the conclusion was
Thanks.
when the easement is secured, then that would be taken into account in the assessment, in the updates to the report.
My name is Arthur Silverstein. I live on Fells Road. One understands that there are advantages and disadvantages to freshwater ponds, to brackish ponds, and to salt ponds. But I was for several years on the OPED board when it was decided, because of the physical nature of the thing, that the pond had to be brackish. It was decided what level of salt was optimal for the alewives, for everything else. And I was there when the weir was put in, and for many years, as it was indicated, it was underwater because the outflow was controlled by the lagoon and by the river. I would have thought, I think one has to ask whether there are any advantages and disadvantages, for example, to making Oyster Pond a saltwater pond again. I know you've said that that's not a consideration, but it would seem to me that the cheapest way, unless there are good arguments against having a salt pond for the residents, for any ecological point of view, I would have thought that the least expensive way to solve the problem of the nitrogen and the phosphorus would be to open again the channel to the sea, let it be a saltwater pond, build a couple of bridges for the road and for the bike path, and solve the problem. But I think one ought to discuss this.
It's a worthwhile discussion item. The state has never changed a water quality standard like that, which you're asking for. No, seriously. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I would have said something similar to that.
He knows who's paying.
No, I think it's a matter of having MEP use their hydrodynamic model to determine how much modification would be needed, how much wider do you need to make the inlet in order to make it a fully functioning saltwater pond.
Yeah, but that's
Weigh the advantages and disadvantages of that.
sure, but that's surely a simple engineering problem.
Why would it not consider that's the basic question that seems
Well,
It's a regulatory issue.
It was all right down by,
Water quality
underneath by
standard
Who made
based on
Who made
the
the
state.
Who made the decision not
The
to?
state.
The state?
The state has never changed a water quality standard without a lot of study. And I'm not saying it's a bad idea, it's just that it's how you want to spend your money.
So who actually made the decision not
The
to?
state,
Who in the state made the decision?
DEP does not change water quality. You have to go through a process. You go through a process of study.
Are you saying that the state has determined what the salt level of Oyster Pond is?
The state has determined the water.
I think the conclusion from the beginning was that on MEPs did their study, and it seemed at the time that the pond was desired to be managed in that state.
Yeah, but it's a brackish pond because when OPET was.
Your point is that they should have looked at that, and so was yours, they should have looked at that more closely.
I'm simply asking a straightforward question. What person made the decision, the department made the decision not to include that?
The decision was made 50 years ago. Where it has been is here, whether it's right or wrong then. It's not worth pursuing for the following reasons, and your reasons were.
Well, the reasons that it hasn't been pursued to date is because there was no technical basis upon which to compare it with MEP, and there was consensus, I think, with the working group, was that that was how the pond was going to be managed. That's how it had been managed, that was how the watershed wanted it managed.
Being in politics myself, I sense there's a lot of politics here. It's just, there seems to be kind of.
Well, I think one of the reasons, which was everyone.
I'm willing to take some of the blame for this, but I.
No,
Hello, I'm Wendy Bissler. I'm the Executive Director of Oyster Pond Environmental Trust, or OPET. I just want to make it clear that OPET does not have a plan, a wastewater management plan. All the things that Bill talked about are things we're discussing. We've been talking about this issue for many, many years. Bill is an engineer, so he's come to our board with many plans. We've discussed it, but we've never, ever endorsed anything. We've never voted on anything. I just want to make clear that we're still looking at all options are on the table. And we certainly welcome everybody's input into this process of trying to make Oyster Pond a healthier place. As far as the salt pond discussion, I know at one time when what had happened was there had been a culvert that connected Oyster Pond to Trunk River and to the lagoon and then Trunk River. That collapsed, I believe, sometime in the mid-90s or 80s. 80s.
It's from 85 to 89.
So it actually had blocked, it was blocked. It was replaced with a larger culvert than had previously been there. It caused the habitat of the pond to change dramatically because more salt water was allowed to come into the pond. I know the white perch and yellow perch fish populations in the pond crashed. Yellow perch, it's gone, but I've heard some people have caught some within the past year. So the yellow perch, yeah, and so it's something you have to think about. You're going to change the entire habitat of the pond. And one reason why I know OPET, this is before I started working with them, but I know that there was I think there was a survey done, and they actually surveyed the residents of the pond to ask them, would you rather keep it as a brackish pond, or would you like to open it up to the ocean? And I believe it was overwhelmingly in the majority to keep it, 2/3 to keep it as it currently is and to manage it.
Is there any data for that? I've heard about that survey for years and years and years.
It's in the records.
Yeah, I actually have the actual survey forms that people returned to, we have it. Yeah, and we have constant contact too. Yeah.
Anyone who wants to be fed a continual stream of information about Oyster Pond through this free medium, just sign up for it and Steve can tell you about it.
I would be happy to redo that poll via the constant contact. So go to our website and make sure you're on the constant contact.
Okay, but you should realize also that as a result of the added salt water, the herring population went to a level that was considered almost resident, was residual, and whether it was going to recover. By Water Resources particularly talked with us, and the state did at that time, and said, I'm sorry, but if you look in your bylaws, you have a responsibility as a town to maintain antromatous fish, and you are not doing that. You need to change it in a way that you can get the herring back in that pond area and functional. Lou now counts up to 400,000 herring leaving per year now in the pond area. The second thing was a massive die-off that occurred of the freshwater subsurface vegetation, and much of that is because there's species like Eladia that are about of salt water. You put in salt water at 3%, like is out in the ocean right now, you just kill it. The whole dissolved oxygen crashes in that portion of the pond, which it did. All regions, all zones, 3 zones of the pond went to anoxic conditions in their bottom areas, not just the small hole that's in the southern portion. So those were effects of us putting in too much salt water, and that was requested that it be changed back and a weir installed, which has worked very well. It also, by having low salt water, we reduce the nitrogen impacts coming in. If you go back to nitrogen right now, you're likely to have algae blooms and fish kills continuously within Oyster Pond. So those are at least 3 conditions you should take care of.
Kathleen Murray. I have always thought that Surf Drive was sort of a natural road built because of the railroad. But now we need it, of course, for safety as an excess. But I've often wondered if with a good hurricane, would it break open an opening again to Oyster Pond and to Salt Pond? Is it possible that it would, because it's all quite narrow in that area and it could easily happen? And has that even been thought about?
Steve would be happy to set you up for the contact, which I think would be worth your while if you're not on already. Everything we do and everything he does is going to be on that website. Available there.
We obviously volunteer.
Thank you.
They'll get the $5 more time. Someone wants to put a compost toilet.